Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Ruhanen. I'm from the University of Queensland. If you just something we should have said at the start. If you see us sort of doing strange sort of dances with little packs here, we're actually filming our presentations today, so that we can share those on our website. That will be just for the people involved. We won't film yourselves and your discussions, but it's just to film the speakers because we've got great people who have come down and come in for this. So that's the strange microphone sort of switches you might see happening. So I've been asked to, and I'm speaking on behalf of my fellow Queensland supporter next to me, who's dressed specially for the occasion, even though she's a cockroach. She's a love in terms of who she supports. We have done some research over about the last 10 years or so looking at Indigenous tourism in Australia. We've done a range of different things looking at businesses, and we've done a fair bit of work on supply and demand for Indigenous tourism. And so that's how we've come to be here. And so Kevin mentioned the sort of the warts and all, and I'm the one that gets to tell you about the warts, unfortunately, as we go through in a little bit. I've only got a short time, and John's got a direct line of eye contact with me there, so he'll let me know if I'm running over. I realise many of you are very well experienced in the tourism industry and would know far more than I ever would, and I realise that some of you this is a little bit new, so please bear with me if what I'm telling you is something you already know, and I'll try and move through fairly quickly, and I'll make this information available afterwards. So, you know, why does everyone want to get into the tourism industry? Every country in the world's got some form of tourism industry, just about. Even some of the sort of the Middle East countries that have had problems for years are trying to get into tourism, realising that, you know, the employment creation, the opportunities to preserve culture, protect the environment, and so on, means that most governments are trying to get on board the sort of the tourism wagon. Around the world, it's worth something like $2 trillion. My maths doesn't allow me to actually even work out what that would look like, but it's a big business. About 1 in 10 jobs around the world are in tourism, and about 10% of the world's gross domestic product, or the money flowing around, comes from tourism. So this year there were 1.2 billion people travelling around the world, and that's not all the people, say, travelling within Australia. Like when Michelle goes home to Sydney to cry about the state of origin, doesn't even include that. These are just people going between countries. So 1.2 billion people. Blows your mind a little bit. Asia Pacific, okay, we've got about 308 million people moving between countries for holidays. If we get down to Australia, okay, we've reached the just over 8 million mark. So we had 8 million tourists coming in last year to visit Australia. So those numbers have grown so considerably in the last little while. So just to tell you just a few quick things about tourism in Australia. So we've gone over the 8 million tourists coming in. These overseas visitors are spending about $40 billion a year in Australia. So while the overseas visitors are great, it's actually the other Australians that make up most of the tourists. So we've got about 90 million tourists in Australia. So us all moving around the country for our various holidays. And we're spending around 60 billion. The most common reason is people are going for holidays, visiting their family, business, and those sorts of things. Some of you would be counted as business tourists. I'm sure you'll stay on and enjoy the cool weather in Brisbane, Rachel. So Rachel would be within one of these sorts of tourist categories. She'd be a business tourist, and of course Robert from Waytop. Why, as I said before, why people are so keen to get into tourism? Well, about 5% of all Australians work in the industry. And those figures can be much higher when we start to look at the jobs that are supported in other sectors that support the tourism industry as well. It's around 1 in 11 jobs in Queensland, give or take, and we're getting up towards sort of 275, maybe 300,000 tourism businesses. Very hard to get these numbers exactly right, but these are the sorts of figures that we're looking at. Tourism's estimated to be worth about 20 billion to the Queensland economy. And they say, something around $55 million a day just for Queensland of tourists moving around the place. So if we think about those international people coming over, the overseas visitors, where are they coming from? Well, it was the United Kingdom, New Zealand that were our really popular markets, but probably you're pretty well aware that China, it's now all about China, and China's now Australia's most valuable tourist market. The numbers are increasing considerably, and also the spending by Chinese visitors has grown a lot. I'd walk over to the screen, but the IT guys will hit me because I promised I would stand behind the lectern and not run around the stage like a fool. But as you can see, something like $9 billion is spent by the Chinese visitors coming to Australia. New Zealand's still very, very popular for Australia, coming over to visit friends and relatives. And we then have some of our more, what we'd call our traditional markets, the UK, Germany, and the United States. Some of those markets, like the United States, though, can be a bit sort of temperamental depending on exchange rates and those sorts of things. And presidents. We might have a new wave of people coming to escape their president. So when the visitors come to Australia, where are they going? Sydney. Sydney's the #1 spot that they're headed to, as well as Melbourne. Okay? But we are so fortunate up in Queensland is that pretty much after they've done Sydney and Melbourne, they're coming up to us. And so you can see there they're coming to Brisbane, Gold Coast, up north, up to the broader Cairns region, and then back down around the Sunshine Coast. So for us down here in southeast Queensland, we are getting a big chunk of these international visitors that are moving through the country. And we're in a really fortunate position because we've got international airport here, we've got one down at the Gold Coast, so we're in a really great position in that way. Just thinking very broadly about some of the sorts of tourism experiences that we offer in Queensland, a lot of it's around the beautiful weather, the great scenery, our great natural resources, the Great Barrier Reef. Obviously, North Queensland has a lot of attractive product, but people when they're coming, especially down into the more urban areas down here around, say, Brisbane, looking for food, these sort of food and beverage experiences. This is something that Australia's really tried to promote itself to, that we're a bit of a cool place to go for food and wine and that sort of thing. And increasingly events. So there's lots of opportunities in that space, as well as sort of culture, creative experience, creative precincts and that sort of thing. Can't forget, of course, the theme parks, which especially for our domestic visitors are really important. This might be a lot of writing in a very short little spot there, but basically for Brisbane, we're getting in around just over 1 million, 1.2 million visitors from overseas, and they stay for quite a while actually. They're staying about 3 weeks in the area. They spend somewhere around $1,700 each while they're here, and then mainly coming for holidays from China and New Zealand. Our domestic visitors, we get about 6 million domestic visitors coming in, and they are mainly coming to Brisbane to actually visit their family or take a holiday. We look down at Gold Coast, similarly considerable numbers there, around 1 million, staying a little bit less, so around the 10 nights. But very similar decent spending, well over $1,000 per person. You can see the difference there though, that about 80% of those people are coming for a holiday. That's why they want the coast. In terms of the domestic market, again, very popular and coming mostly from interstate. I couldn't get these figures for Brisbane for some reason. The statistics data gods were being really mean to me over the last 2 days. But we can see in the Gold Coast that there's somewhere in the vicinity of 8,000 tourism businesses across all sorts of, across the whole sector. Moving up to the Sunshine Coast, bit of a different situation, looking at around say 300,000 international visitors, again coming for holidays, having a bit less spend per person, but still pretty significant at sort of $800 odd a visitor. These markets are mainly from New Zealand and the UK, and they also have a good domestic market, but mostly comes from other parts of Queensland, as opposed to the Gold Coast, which is mainly drawing in those interstate visitors, probably for the theme parks and things. And you can see that there's somewhere around 3,500 tourism businesses. Just a little bit about the Indigenous tourism landscape in Australia. And as I said, many of you will know a hell of a lot more than me about this. But this is a really an old definition now from Tourism Queensland, but it's one that I quite like. It just talks about that Indigenous tourism can involve all tourism activities that involve Indigenous people and are sensitive to Indigenous culture. And I think these are some of this sorts of definitions might be part of our discussions later about what Indigenous tourism really should be. But our national tourism body, Tourism Australia, they go overseas and say, you know, come to Australia, there's all these great things to do. And these are some of the sorts of images and experiences that they're trying to sell to international visitors about Australia. We're looking in Queensland, okay, we do have a number of Indigenous tourism businesses, and we're at the state level, so we have Tourism Australia promoting the whole country, and then we have Tourism and Events Queensland promoting the businesses in Queensland. And this comes from a product manual that they've developed that showcases the different types of Indigenous tourism businesses in the state. So it won't have everyone on there, but these are the ones that they're looking at. You can see there's a grouping down in the southeast corner, and I'll show you those again in a moment. And you can see another sort of grouping up around the Cairns, Port Douglas, Wellington, of course, area. So also centering around Rocky there, but you can see we've got two fairly distinct groups of businesses. Now, as I said, these aren't all the businesses in the state. These are just the Indigenous tourism businesses that are being promoted through these manuals. So you can see, and now I've made my writing too small and I'm not allowed to move from the lectern, but one of the experiences that they promote in this is the Quandamooka Festival. Also got the River Life experience in Brisbane. They're promoting the Brisbane Readers Program, so it's like sort of a tour program, Aboriginal component in that now. The GOMA, the Gallery of Modern Art down here, has they're promoting that within their Indigenous experiences. Dreamworld, the Centre at Burleigh, I think. I didn't think I needed glasses, but I think I may do. Very unpopular. And down at Currumbin. So there's obviously a lot of other things. There's stuff happening down at the coast. There's stuff happening here in Brisbane, and there's a lot of other experiences. But these are the ones that our state tourism body's sort of saying, come here and check these out, just in our part of the state. So to tell you a little bit about who is the tourist that comes and has an Indigenous tourism experience in Australia, well, this is an area that things get a little bit murky, and I'm not going to look at John because I feel that I've been talking for a while already, so I'm going to deliberately avoid his eyes. When they say, you know, how many Indigenous, they call Indigenous tourists. So these are people coming for an Indigenous tourism experience. They basically count anyone who's had a visit, say, to an Aboriginal site or a community, or they've experienced an Aboriginal art, craft, cultural display, or attended some sort of Aboriginal performance. They don't have had to have, and may not have paid any money for this. And the research that we did with IBA a few years ago was trying to understand a bit more about that, because there was a feeling that maybe these figures were a little overinflated at the time. You can see there that in 2010 there were around 690,000 international visitors that ticked the box that said they'd had some sort of Indigenous tourism experience. You might be saying, Lisa, you're a bit lazy in not updating those figures from 2010. They haven't collected data, this sort of specific data in that time. So we're going on some quite old data here. So about 690,000 international visitors. You can see there that we still had around 300,000 domestic visitors, so Australians on holidays having an Indigenous experience also. Most of the people are on package tours, and we could see at that time that there was a lot of growth in the Asian markets for this type of tourism experience. And in the 7 years, my guess would be that that's probably changed even more, and we've got some, as I said, people that might talk more about that today. Mostly from the UK, the US, China. People coming having these Indigenous tourism experiences are more likely to visit regional areas of the country, but still a lot of scope for opportunities around the capital cities and Gold Coast. So these are the sorts of things that they did when they filled their survey in of what they were doing. And you can see that for most people, for both international and domestic, it was viewing an Aboriginal art, craft or cultural display, visiting a gallery, going to a cultural centre, dances and theatre performances, and purchasing souvenirs. And I'll explain to you, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So some of the work that we did with Indigenous Business Australia, trying to understand more about who these visitors were, what they were really looking for. And so we surveyed about 1,400 tourists who were travelling around Australia, both international and domestic. And we wanted to understand what they thought of. Did they think of an Indigenous experience? Was it sort of like a thing that they thought, I'm going to Australia, this is what I want to do? And what we found is that they thought of a whole lot of things before they came up with an Aboriginal cultural experience. And we tried to measure how aware they were. So if they don't know about these experiences, how are they going to do them? And we could see that the awareness, and sorry Josh, I'm going to move. We can see that the awareness was quite low. And then when we started to talk to them about whether they were going to have an experience, it kept declining. And so this graph is very steep, but you can see that around sort of in the vicinity of about 20% of people we talked to could think of, they named an Indigenous tourism experience. Then when we started to say, well, will you go and do that while you're here? It dropped quite down to around 10%. It dropped all the way down to their intentions to around sort of 3 or 4%. So looking at our data that we have, that probably represents a market of around 160,000 international tourists, but around just under 2 million domestic tourists who are, probably ready to go for an experience based on sort of the current status quo. Obviously, there's a lot we could do to change that. So even though it's always been assumed that international visitors are the only ones that would like an Indigenous experience, we kind of saw that there'd be opportunities in both markets, and they have sort of similar levels of awareness and intentions. So when we said, well, why aren't you having an experience? Why wouldn't you go and do this? They were saying things like, oh, we don't have time, we've got other activities we want to do, it's too expensive, we don't have the money, those sorts of things. They also talked about, oh, well, we don't know how much we would want to pay for that, and that's something IBA was quite interested to know about. And so if you go back to that list I showed before of, what the tourists are actually doing, if you look at some of the main ones, these could actually be free experiences. These could be seeing a performer in the street, a performer in Circular Quay. It could be going to a souvenir shop in the mall and buying some sort of souvenir. So when we start to look at what they're doing, there's a lot more scope to add in products that they can that require some purchase. So very quickly, there's a lot of opportunities that we saw from our research. One of the best things is that most tourists to Australia stay on the eastern seaboard. Tourism Queensland at one point were very interested in how we compare to WA. And we said, yes, WA have great product, but we at least have the people coming up and down the corridor here. So this is a great opportunity for us. Some research that has been done very recently with one of my students who's up the back there, paying attention, is that those people who do have an Indigenous experience are very, very satisfied. 85% of people who wrote a TripAdvisor review on their Indigenous experience were satisfied. And I don't know that you get many businesses that could claim that, so that's fantastic. We also found that service elements are very important. The guide, the whole service experience, they still want that. So there's also opportunities to develop beyond cultural products. And I'll talk a bit more about that in the next presentation. And that we need to do more about raising that awareness. If people don't know about an experience that they can have, they're probably not going to do it. So that was a very quick tourism intro. Thank you.